Today we have for you a compilation of what I'm essentially calling cancelled one-off movies. These were the movies that ended up unfinished to some degree, but also have no direct attachment to any kind of franchise at all. Whilst there are whole heaps of alternate timelines of Pixar sequels, or genuine expansions to an IP that just never follows through, this is kind of the oddball of the bunch. Stories that you probably would have never really ever heard of, although ironically actually in this case, one of them becomes an IP, but at the time that this one was made and cancelled, it wasn't an established thing yet. Either way, kick your feet up, enjoy this long-form compilation of the cancelled one-off movies. Today we're touching on the somewhat rare appearance of a Disney cancellation, and one that had the final nail in the coffin land just last year. It's been suggested many a times on our Discord, and that is the project that was Disney's Gigantic. Now, Gigantic was a planned computer-animated musical comedy film announced back on August 14th, 2015 by John Lasseter at the D23 Expo. And more so than just being any musical, it was specifically sprouting off of the backs of a very popular duo from that time, with the songs being written for the film by Kristen Anderson Lopez and Robert Lopez. Who are they? Well, they're none other than the Academy Award-winning creators behind the songs in Frozen. Yes, these guys are the ones you can blame for those songs playing on repeat for like, what, 3 years back then? Unsurprisingly, the pair won for Best Original Song with Let It Go, so translating them onto another major Disney musical can only mean the best feat were going forwards with this. That's not the correct phrase. As for other members of the team, there was producer Dorothy McKim, who produced the acclaimed short Get a Horse, or something that I can at least understand as producer for Meet the Robinsons, as well as helping in some form on pretty much everything Disney from the last 20 years. And then there's the other big swinger on the crew, director Nathan Greeno, known for co-directing Disney's other released CG musical, Tangled, for all of you anti-Frozen hipsters. Also writing Meet the Robinsons and being the story artist for several other Disney projects. This is a real Meet the Robinsons reunion. So what is this Gigantic? What's it all about? Well, it's sort of like your classic Disney prompt, just done very, very late. Adapting archaic fairy tales again. We've had Cinderella, Snow White, Little Mermaid, Rapunzel, and now Jack and the Beanstalk. With a few changes, of course. As director Nathan Greeno said himself, we want to make the definitive version of Jack and the Beanstalk. It's not what you've seen before. It's not one big castle with one big giant walking around. Pretty cool, starting to see all sorts of room for potential in such an open prompt. After this first official announcement, more crew members then started popping up to public knowledge, like Raymond S. Percy, who confirmed on social media that he would be storyboarding for the film. Previously known for the likes of late 90s Simpsons, Sing, Wreck-It Ralph Breaks the Internet, and Frozen and Get a Horse. This is a well-oiled machine of a team that clearly have a lot of overlap, huh? Greeno described Gigantic as a sort of tearjerker, though also one that'll have plenty of comedic moments as well. So, we get the idea. Let's get into the actual plot synopsis. There's a handful of descriptions online, I'll make some sort of merger of them all. So, set in Spain during the Age of Exploration, a young adventurer named Jack is who the film follows as he comes into possession of some magic beans, which lead him to discover a world of giants hidden within the clouds, including a 60-foot-tall 11-year-old girl called Inma, who he befriends. Described as fiery, feisty, and very hard to control. Initially, she mistakes Jack for a toy, treating him like a living doll, but the pair eventually form a tight bond, tighter than her rib-crushing grip. He agrees to help her find her way home, and they join forces to stop the Storm Giants, our antagonists of the film, who tower at 120 feet tall, who are a group of enormous bad guys who are wreaking havoc. The film would be one with comedy and deep emotion, and certainly a divergence from the original since the main giant is already a more innocent, little-ish girl within a whole world of giants. Now that's just the synopsis in its somewhat simplest form, but there are all sorts of other elements we can still learn about the film. For example, everything from the film's concept art to its storyboards were all shown off at the announcement of the film, which I imagine you all saw anyway as we went through that summary. But there was loads more shown at this specific presentation. Like, how's about a sample of the music from Kristen Anderson Lopez and Robert Lopez? I don't actually have the song, or the sound of it, but we do have lyrics. I would sing it to you myself, but No one wants to hear that. I can't bear to imagine seeing the audience retention chart after that. But we can analyze the lyrics briefly. But first, you should subscribe. I love my little man, I love my little man. You can make him do this, you can make him do this. Presumably from the giant discovering Jack in the early days and still thinking of him as a little doll. You can wash him in a dish, be careful he gets ticklish, my teeny little man. There are so many things you can do with a little man. You can toss him in the air, you can pet his tiny hair, my pretty, pretty, pretty little man. You can make him do this, you can make him do this, and he even makes a pretty good bookmark. This? Horrifying, but we also actually see it with one of the concept arcs, squishing Jack between the pages of a book. Rip Jack. In a life that's kind of lonely, I thought if only I had a little man. All culminating on the real reason behind the song and a peer into Inma's psyche. She is in fact lonely and without friends. Maybe it's a child thing, maybe it's a not being a bad guy thing, or some theories suggest it might be an actual father figure thing. With Inma not having a father, being so desperate for a little man could make a lot of sense, and opens up a lot of doors for emotional development if Jack ends up having to take that role. The size difference certainly allows for the comedy to swing into. Or it could be she's lonely because she's not at home and she needs to get home, as the plot synopsis said. Whatever the case, it's kinda Anna's arc again. All the while, Jack is being little manhandled, thrown around in a paper airplane, being dishwashed and all that fun. And since it's not clear, it's a toss-up between whether Jack would be squirming through all these moments, hence the ticklish line, and a comment of being a living doll in the synopsis, or if he was playing dead just in order to survive, as opposed to actually starting to talk to Inma here. And some speculated that this ruse would continue with any interaction with other giants, considering they're probably a lot less agreeable. Still, this is a look into an early sequence of the film, and during the presentation, this song was fully being performed by the songwriters as the relevant concept art went by. Here's an exasperated Jack at the mercy of Inma, Inma proudly holding up her new toy up into the air. Here's Inma looking mischievously down at a hopeless Jackie. He sure is hopeless a lot in this film, isn't he? But beyond just the music samples, the concept art, the logo, and all that jazz, there's not actually jazz in this, but anyway, that was a stupid joke, why did I say it? It's not even in the script. There was further proof of Gigantic's serious progress on the development line, at least in concept, as much like Pixar and their films, snuck in places are of course references from other movies. And just like Newt with Toy Story 3, the same happened here with this cancelled project still reaching the big screen in referential form. You either know this or you don't, but it is in Zootropolis. You can guess where. There's that big Easter egg scene with a bunch of DVD covers, right? You've got all sorts of references with Pig Hero 6, Wrangled, Wreck-It Rhino, and right alongside all of them is Giraffic, turning Jack into a squirrel and the beanstalk into a giraffe's neck. Classic. This is as close to the real thing as we will ever get, probably. Unless they choose to revive this project in the future, which I guess is possible, but anyway. There is no official footage from the movie, unfortunately. So yes, this is as HD and in color and in motion, I guess, as it gets. What went wrong? Well, in 2015, Gigantic was pushed back to March 9th, 2018, and was originally set to be entitled just Giants, actually. However, on June 30th, 2016, Walt Disney Animation Studios announced that Ralph Breaks the Internet would be released on that date, and Gigantic would launch instead on the 21st of November, 2018. Okay. A little later, on October 3rd, 2016, things were still going well, at least on the Disney front. DreamWorks, you'll never guess what was happening to them. As a new crew member was added, with writer Meg LeFauve being announced to join the film as a co-director with Nathan Greeno. Previously working slightly outside the Disney animation sphere with a history in writing Inside Out, Captain Marvel, The Good Dinosaur, and ironically Gigantic, a TV show that has no relevance to this at all. Still, some people were really hyped up about this edition, with the massively successful promotion of Jennifer Lee from screenwriter to director with Chris Buck within Frozen, which clearly paid off looking at how well Frozen turned out. Very much Disney mirroring their prior great moves. On April 25th, 2017, Disney then announced that the release date had now been pushed up to November 25th, 2020, scheduling it to be the 59th animated feature in the Disney animated canon, following the release of Frozen 2 in November 2019. And Ralph Breaks the Internet took Gigantic's November 2018 slot. And then Gigantic was eventually pulled from the film slate entirely, because Gigantic had some creative delays, even after Disney had hired Meg LaFauve to co-write and direct the movie. According to Disney and Pixar Animation president Ed Catmull, the project was cancelled due to creative differences. Wow, how descriptive there. And Disney had to admit defeat and stated that the movie's concept just wasn't there. It's impossible to know when we begin a project how the creative process will unfold, and sometimes, no matter how much we love an idea or how much heart goes into it, we find that it just isn't working, Catmull clarified. With Gigantic, we've come to that point, and although it's a difficult decision, we are ending active development for now. We are focusing our energies on another project that has been in the works, which we'll be sharing more about soon, now set for Thanksgiving 2020. It was Raya and the Last Dragon. That got delayed too because it's 2020, remember? And that was the very small tale of Disney's cancelled Gigantic. They keep these things pretty tight-lipped, eh? The way they mention creative differences could be interpreted as struggling to work with the concept well enough, or it could have been a full-on internal conflict of ideas. But we will never know. Jack and the Beanstalk is one of those classic fairy tales though, so I imagine if there's any motivation for a dropped film to be picked up again, it would probably be here. Of the changes we did get to hear, it certainly looks to be an interesting and functional prompt, but the rest is up to our imagination. There was no super musical sequel to Frozen, unless you count Frozen 2. Kristen Anderson Lopez and Robert Lopez would go on to work with the WandaVision soundtrack as well as Spies in Disguise, and they worked on Coco? These guys are legendary. But even with Disney's Encanto coming up, they're not involved. Oh, that's because Disney labbed Lin-Manuel Miranda for that. I guess that makes sense. Even still, this giant beanstalk story has wilted, and the only Disney adaptation we've got is the 74-year-old version that is Mickey and the Beanstalk. I guess it'll do. Today we're talking about Laika. Kinda. There are actually two notable Laika movies that have been cancelled to a certain extent. One of which is very much tied to Laika Studios as a movie, but has so little details about it that it's literally called Animated Adventure. And then we may cover it a little bit later on, since there is loads of concept art we could talk about maybe next month. The one I want to talk about is the more Laika-esque production that's actually properly cancelled and has a whole lot more stuff going on about it. This is the fabled Henry Selick movie. Now, Henry Selick is the main Laika guy that you probably associate with Laika movies. This is the director of Coraline, not to mention Nightmare Before Christmas, James and the Giant Peach, and Wendell and Wild. But we'll get to the future projects a little bit later on. Now picture this, you've just created, directed, and enjoyed the successes of Coraline, right? One of the greatest stop-motion animated movies of all time, and that is not much of a contested opinion. Clearly, following off from that, you want to make the next big major project, and this next cancelled one is the one that has been doomed and lingering for quite a while, because it's not exactly a Laika movie. You see, Selick was actually approached by John Lasseter right after Coraline with the hopes of making a new Disney stop-motion movie, essentially bringing Disney a whole new style up front and center, which is interesting. Now, of course, Coraline came out in 2009, so that's a bit of an idea of where we are in the timeline. John Lasseter is unfortunately still around. But when given the opportunity after such a major success to move to Disney and do a production there, of course you would want to take that, right? And apparently, Henry Selick moving around studios isn't even something that was strange or controversial, as Laika Studios had even said that they were still on good terms with Henry Selick when he decided to leave Laika, saying, quote, "Selick has a history of wandering from studio to studio with each project. He is hoping he has found a comfortable and long-lasting home for whatever is next for him." And as for a quote from Henry Selick himself, he says,
"What I personally gravitate towards tends to be fantasy, medium dark, not too dark, fairy tales, and sci-fi. Stop motion takes something on the page that's really dark and adds a little sweetness to it. A living toys realm."
And so, that would be the idea around this unproduced movie. Alongside the fact that obviously it's going to have a kind of Coraline-y tone, despite not being adapted from a book or anything, we do also know that the team was also said to use rapid prototype 3D printer technology as seen in Laika's Paranorman. Hence why we've got footage of Laika's Paranorman mixed into this movie. There is very little actual animated footage of this movie, so the stuff I've got going on behind us is a general feel for what it could potentially be. Now, for the longest time, back in the early days of 2008, 9, 2010, we didn't actually know many specifics of the plotline. However, details have since come out in 2022, centering on a young boy named Hap with the ability to shape his fingers into whatever shape he wants. Hap wants to be a shadow puppet master, but is unable to make any compelling shadows until he meets a mysterious shadow girl. She teaches him how to make shadow puppets that come to life, ultimately leading Hap and his brother to become embroiled in a war for the shadow world. That is at least the latest version of the plotline as of 2022. There could very well be some earlier elements going into the early 2009 versions. We do know this production went through all sorts of changes, but that is an idea for the general tone we're going for. Ironically enough, it's another cancelled movie all about shadows. We are very familiar with shadow-based cancelled productions. Nobody likes to make 2D shadow shows anymore. I don't know. Stop motion and shadows as well would be really interesting to see. Like, are these shadows 3D stop motion models, or is it again something with actual lighting? It's interesting. Shadows is such a great prompt for a movie, just a nightmare to animate, and apparently that shows. Anyway, this project would be known as The Shadow King, which obviously fits in with the plot we heard earlier, and we actually had an original cast lined up way back earlier in the timeline, with the actors being on board for a project like this being Brendan Gleeson, Catherine O'Hara, and Jeffrey Tambor. Again, this was mentioned, I believe, in 2022, but that is some of the actors in mind that could have potentially arrived for this project, had it been made. Now, this movie also had an original schedule for October 2013. That would have been the final ending point had everything gone right. However, obviously, it didn't. And what went wrong? Well, everything went wrong, of course, at Disney. There is no actual Laika interaction, at least this point in the timeline. This is all just Henry's come to Disney, and now he's having issues here. And once again, we didn't have any kind of information at the actual time of this movie being cancelled. What we did hear in this timeline part, before we got news later on, is that they cancelled the movie mid-production and seemed to have taken a $50 million write-down for the movie, which I assume is the same as a tax write-off. It's just different wording for, like, 2010. They didn't necessarily disclose which film had been cancelled, but you can probably assume it's this one because we never saw it. It was only ever known back then as the Untitled Animation Project by Henry Selick. And then at the time, the Disney Chief Financial Officer, Jay Rasulo, told analysts at the time, after looking at it, we've decided we don't want to continue with it. And that's about it. However, we can now piece the dots a good 12 years later. This is just a quick plug to tell you to subscribe. However, we can now piece the dots a good 12 years later, as in 2022, an interview with Selick actually blamed John Lasseter for the cancellation of The Shadow King. Oh, it all comes full circle, doesn't it? The actual quote we've got from Selick is,
"They screened Coraline at Pixar and everyone liked it, and they offered me a deal to make a stop-motion film. It had to be for a much lower budget than CG films. Stop-motion films live forever though, and, as we see with Nightmare Before Christmas, makes billions in merchandising. John Lasseter really couldn't support my vision. He thought he could make it better, and so we kept changing and changing and changing. Basically, John Lasseter couldn't help himself. He tried to Disney-fy it until the budget went through the roof. It got shut down, and I was kinda down. I wasn't sure I was going to make another movie again."
And so there's your story for the production issues. John Lasseter added something on, changing the story as much as he could to make it more Disney, increasing the budget, and then deleting it when it became too expensive, despite clearly probably making profits later. It's a matter of experts in the industry of Disney and experts in the industry of stop motion, you know? And hey, maybe on a more speculative thought, maybe they also decided to switch it up after DreamWorks switched up their stop motion arrangements. DreamWorks famously had a deal with Aardman in the early 2000s, and then that fell through after a little bit. Maybe Disney wanted to also take on another stop motion studio, and then took it out early when it was a slight bump on the road. But our production story of The Shadow King doesn't end there, as Selick would then go on to take this project back to Laika, where it was revealed at that time to once be called Shademaker, and would be surrounding two brothers. Again, you can see where different versions of the plots ebbed and flowed and tweaked over time. Anyway, with talks ongoing between Selick and Laika and funding this movie, ultimately, they chose not to fund it either. So despite the fact that it was gonna take Selic's special brand of surrealism into a new direction, it died on the cutting room floor trying to be shopped around. There were murmurs that Disney cancelled the project because it was too dark, but really they're just murmurs at the time. It could be a little bit of everything. And also we did learn that there was a sequence included that was taking place at Central Park, of which some footage of the Shadow King has been leaked online. I said we didn't have any animated footage. There's, leaked tiny stuff. So clearly some production was finished, but it ended in a way that was the most dissatisfying. However, perhaps there is a happy ending to this production story, as Selick would obviously go on to make other movies, going on to make James and the Giant Peach and Wendell and Wild. In fact, it was with Wendell and Wild that he started thinking otherwise, as Selick actually reacquired the rights to the Shadow King in 2022.
Guess what? I got the rights back from Disney, and maybe if Wendell and Wild is considered a success, maybe I'll revive the Shadow King. It'll be different. It'll be like my original story, which they claimed they loved, but then changed everything in it. In my mind, it was a sort of like a darker in tone Dumbo. You know, Dumbo is made fun of for his big ears, and turns out, my god, that elephant can fly. Well, this was a kid with deformed hands, and maybe they're not as cute as big ears, and that was their problem, but that's a really messed up thing. He's gonna get taught by a live-in shadow girl how to use those hands to not only make the greatest hand shadows in the world, but hand shadows that can come to life. I thought that was a really good story, and I still think it is.
So perhaps with the success of Netflix's released a couple years ago Wendell and Wild, maybe the story goes further. Whether or not the original cast would be coming back for this production if it got up and running again, who knows, they'll probably start from scratch again if you ask me, but really, it sounds like it comes down to the success of Netflix's Wendell and Wild. Have you seen this movie? Because I haven't seen this movie. I'd like to get around to it though. And so I had a look into it to see the popularity and success of Wendell and Wild. And it looks pretty good. Getting an 80% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes and a 64% from audiences, a 6.4 out of 10 on IMDb, and a 4 out of 5 on Empire Magazine. It seems plausible. I wouldn't say it's raving reviews, it's not absolutely aesthetic, it's not the next Coraline done by someone else, but it is another Henry Selick movie that seems to be a tone that a lot of people really jive with. People seem to be adoring the weird, surreal mind of this director, but also, it's not explosive. I personally had never even heard about this movie before this point, but I wasn't very good at keeping up with Netflix animated productions. So really, it could be a real coin toss. Clearly, there is anticipation from the director to create it, and they do own the rights and enjoy the story, and it's been 2 years since that interview, so maybe they're secretly working on said project, but really, I guess we'll have to see. Is this even a cancelled Laika production? Is it gonna go full circle? It has been done before. We previously covered the cancelled Nimona movie, and then that got revived on Netflix too. It could even be a Netflix thing with such a clear establishment created with Henry Selick and Netflix. I guess we'll just have to see. In fact, it's funny I say all of that as, hey, this is Daz from the future here. Turns out, pretty much all of this has been confirmed to a certain extent. Recently, we had the Annecy Film Festival where Henry Selick was there showcasing a bunch of news. And they had a handful of things in mind. On top of the fact that they've announced that they are making a new adaptation to another Neil Gaiman book, known as The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which already is very thematic to Henry Selick since this is the same author behind Coraline, so this is not so much a spiritual successor, but very much a same parallel. Especially with them specifically describing that film as, instead of a child going to his other world with a monstrous mother, it's a monstrous mother who comes into our world to wreak havoc on a kid's life. Lovely, we love trauma. But also, they have just outright announced The Shadow King. Kind of. Henry Selick reiterated that they have indeed acquired the rights from Disney, and now they are turning this into a graphic novel. A cancelled project, it's gone through some motions, it's back in book form, and who knows, maybe with a little bit more success from The Ocean at the End of the Lane, or just in general some time has passed. Perhaps maybe the Shadow King will be real and fully revived, a la the best case scenario like Nimona. I've been cooking on this video for like 2 weeks, so admittedly I've just been slow about it, so of course I got interrupted, but there you are. But still, at least this twisted, warped Disney version of the movie is indeed our cancelled Henry Selick Laika Disney early 2010s movie. I'm gonna have a hard time titling this video, I can already tell. Today we're talking about a unique looking unfinalized film by the name of My Peoples by Walt Disney Feature Animations. And it's certainly going to put us in a different space to all of our previous entries, as we're turning the clocks back now to 1998 for this. The whole context of who's in charge and involved is drastically different, so let's get into it. So My Peoples was a film and passion project developed in the late 1990s by a guy called Barry Cook. Here's his picture. And he was a pretty prominent Disney man back then. The 90s were a harsh time for the animation department, as many rival companies were putting their foot in the ring for the first time, and Disney themselves were struggling to keep up with their own successes of The Lion King for a while. That is until Mulan came out with just the kind of boost they needed at the time. And Barry Cook becomes involved there as he was the co-director of Mulan, so not exactly a nobody. Similarly, in the past, he was also the visual effects supervisor for Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast, as well as effects animator for The Little Mermaid. So he's involved in all the major projects, essentially. Now, this new project began 5 months after Mulan was finished, or at least in pitch form it was, in which it was to be an animated short story Cook had previously written called The Ghost and the Gift, which had 3 children and a ghost helping an Appalachian couple get together. But it was rejected by the 2 head honchos of Disney in the late 90s, Michael Eisner, the Disney CEO, and Thomas Schumacher, the head of Walt Disney Feature Animation. It's a slightly different company name too. Anyway, Eisner thought the story needed more conflict, while Schumacher thought that the cast was too human, and the film was essentially a live-action story instead. So it was rewritten, and very much taken to an extreme countermeasure, as soon enough the characters became far from human, becoming a collection of junk parts as fits the culture of Appalachian residents who create household item dolls. So he created a maquette of a character, delivered it to LA, and had it placed on a conference room table for the next story meeting. Barry then gave his pitch over the phone, intrigued Schumacher with its nice reveal, and had My Peoples greenlighted with a budget of $45 million. So okay, that's a nice IRL tale of how it started. What was the actual story? Well, it went something like this. Set in Appalachia, Texas in the 1940s, My People was to have told the classic tale of 2 feuding families, not Montagues and Capulets, but the Harpers and the McGees, whose 2 children, Elgin and Rose, fall in love. Elgin as well dabbled in folk art, creating the doll characters we know as Angel, a heaven-themed doll made from a flower scoop created as a proposal gift, Abe, an Abraham Lincoln doll made from a scrub brush who has spoons for ears, Cherokee, a Native American boy doll fashioned out of an old garden glove, Miss Spinster, an old lady doll made from the wooden leg of Elgin's dead aunt. Oh. Good-O Boy, a hillbilly type doll made from car parts. Blues Man, a doll with the mannerisms of a blue musician constructed from the handle of a broken mandolin. Crazy Ray, a convict-themed doll made from a tree stump that apparently lived under Elgin's porch. And Angel's Dog, the canine companion made from a spool and clothespin. That's certainly a unique collection of characters, and considering it's the 90s, I'm cautious on whether this would have been done tastefully or not. There's certainly room for error. In fact, Cook also considered the possibility of an over-the-top southern preacher named Preacher Man. However, the execs at Disney worried that they could be considered offensive and cut him out. Maybe for the best. So with all that cast, how does it come together? Well, we actually have the opening pretty clearly laid out for us in a prologue opening number animatic. In it, it explains that the 2 families lived next door until one day some sort of misunderstanding with a pig causes the 2 old men of their respective families to fight. The 2 lovers meet up together and exchange gifts, and the next day the McGee's new chicken lays a blue egg that the family immediately assumes is a curse put on the family by the Harpers. And it turns out to be true in other descriptions, being a curse to make Rose forget about Elgin, but it backfires, swallowing the 2 of them away in a storm after their attempted proposal with the Angel doll, and later on animating all of Elgin's dolls. All the while, Old Man McGee is left looking sadly out of his window where his kids were last seen, or something to that effect is to be this first draft of the events. What we then hear going forward is that Angel, now animated, is unimpressed with being a proposal gift and has no intentions to help Rose and Elgin get together, instead leaving town. Some of the other dolls would go after her, whilst others did what they could to help the couple, including the act of keeping away Rose's arranged suitor, Herbert Hollingshead. The details of how these adventures play out is where details become more muddled, especially with the fact that rewrites were aplenty. After all, while Eisner was on board, he described the project as cute but feeling small. But Barry Cook had counters for this in the production department, signing the actual voice cast to be massive, whilst keeping down costs by dipping into the CG transition going on at the time, pitching the production as being 70% CG and 30% hand-drawn. Wow, that's certainly ahead of its time, actually. And apparently CG was cheaper. How would that fit in? Well, the idea was going to be that the dolls would be CG, whilst the humans and backgrounds were traditionally animated, given the effect that they pop out on the screen once they become animated. An interesting idea, and we could see some of that in effect, though this is early 2000 tech, so it's a little rough around the edges. Still cool though. Come subscribe for more cancelled content. So let's have a look at the actual visuals we have of the film. We've got a size comparison that confuses me because Abe is gigantic. What a doll. There's a test animation for Bluesman singing on a blues stage, an attempt at the 2D and 3D integration, which is a good go, though less succinct as what can be done in later years. There's an Edna Lee test, as it's called, looking like a 2D animated version of Miss Spinster, a new name and animation style? Okay. A good look at Old Man McGee, a whole storyboard of Old Man McGee's story, apparently, though it looks like the guy making some sort of poisonous substance. Is this meant to be a version of The Curse, which means it's Old Man Harper? There's also pieces of a music number with the dolls, really highlighting the strange size differences in places. And then all sorts of locations for the adventure. A rail crossing with a steam train at night, out in nature with a few characters, a few glimpses inside the home. Is this fancy concept art or an abstract sequence actually in the movie? A gloomy night with some kind of risky character design, being near a gas station, presumably near the car repair shop, some 3D models realized, and hey, here's even more details on the actual humans of the story. I didn't see much of those. There's a little outhouse, a school bus, a scrap heap by a tree that good old boy later turns into a vehicle. Cool. And then there's the actual animated stuff, like this proof of concept showing most dolls reacting in a cinema screening of The Sixth Sense. It was relevant in 1999, with Granny telling quips and spoiling the movie, and the dog having an unexpectedly low voice for his teeny tiny size.
Pipe down, you old bag!
Poochie, you just made a date with Gucci. Oh!
What a line. What a line. And this final bit with Abraham Lincoln animated. Overall, it looks pretty interesting, but I could never piece all of these things together, really. As for the voice cast, tell me if you recognize some of these people. Dolly Parton as Angel. And then people more known for pre-2000 stuff. Mostly before my time, in all honesty. But they are Billy Connolly as Angel's dog, known as Fergus in Brave and Dane in the Hobbit series. Diedrich Bader as Herbert Hollingshead, who's Rex in Napoleon Dynamite and Trapjaw in the new He-Man. Hal Holbrook as Abe, who he's later involved with Lincoln in the 2012 film Lincoln. Lily Tomlin as Miss Spinster, who's now Aunt May in the Spider-Verse, though I recognize her as Mrs. Berenger in Pink Panther 2.
Inspector, we never refer to Japanese people as our little yellow friends.
But why?
This all went over my head as a kid. My god. Anyway, next there's Lou Rawls as Bluesman, known for his soundtrack work on stuff like Playback and The Tuxedo. Ashley Judd as Rose McGee, being in Double Jeopardy at the time and Twin Peaks in 2017. Travis Tritt as Elgin Harper, being in Blues Brothers 2000 with Lou Rawls. And more soundtracking for My Cousin Vinny and Honeymoon in Vegas. Mike Snyder, with an I, as Good Old Boy, performing in The Dolly Show and as an announcer in Nashville Beat. And finally, there's Charles Durning as Old Man McGee, being in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, as well as the Muppet movie in 1979. A lot of this, admittedly, goes over my head, but it's a whole different time with a whole different people, and some of these guys were big, winning awards and everything. Not to mention, for a short time, Barry Cook had convinced James Carville to voice Crazy Ray. Who's James Carville? I didn't know. He was the former lead strategist for Bill Clinton's presidential campaigns. Nowadays commenting on liberal politics still, but notably giving a prediction in the 2020 election that was, quote, the most audacious, confident, and spectacularly incorrect prognostication about the year for thinking the presidency would be known by 10 PM rather than 4 days later. I'm sorry I keep falling down rabbit holes here, but it's fascinating as a British guy who doesn't know 1990s America. Still, what a crazy casting. Imagine if politicians getting into movies was a trend. There were also big hits in the soundtrack with bluegrass musician Ricky Staggs hired to work with Marty Stewart and Hank Williams III, each known for The Raw Deal and The Cat in the Hat, The Marty Stewart Show, and Fun with Dick and Jane, Driven, and The Judge, respectively, so a lot of the budget went there too. But of course, things started to go downhill fast. One of the things to note actually comes from that prologue song again, which seems to be a slightly later draft of events as it describes the film as taking place in
Long ago about 1811.
Which is certainly not the 1940s vibe from before. Abraham Lincoln was just about born then, huh? But rewrites would become commonplace after one major change. In January of 2003, Thomas Schumacher resigned as head of animation and was replaced by former television animation head David Stainton. And this guy was not on board with My Peoples. Immediately, Staten began to suggest several name changes for the film, hence why there's a lot of titles, like Once in a Blue Moon, or Elgin's People, or a favourite, Angel and Her No Good Sister, which implies conflict immediately, apparently. Staten found himself unimpressed with the film's story reel presented to him in February 2003, so it was rewritten again. After taking a research trip to the Appalachian Mountains, Cook then suggested that the dolls be not spelled to life, but possessed by Elgin's deceased relatives. Cheery. But it makes sense, as a lot of ghost stories were present in that city. Though something that was clarified for, say, the Abraham Lincoln character was he wasn't literally the president. He's an old scrub brush with spoons for ears that thinks he's president. Like Teddy in Arsenic and Old Lace, who thinks he's Roosevelt. So they, quote, "We're gonna have him do crazy President Lincoln kind of things, like emancipating the chickens out in the barnyard." But that said, Abe's character was also going to be this movie's voice of reason. He would be the one advising caution when all of the characters wanted to go rushing after Angel. What that means for his traits if possessed by a dead human that's probably not the president, I have no idea, but you can see how it gets complicated on the logic. Due to this alteration now, the title was changed from My Peoples to A Few Good Ghosts. Sounds less appealing to me. While Staten was happy with this change, Barry Cook, having now a personal attachment to his original storyline, wished he could stick with it. However, as director, you know you gotta make sacrifices for the big bad Hollywood process. And the grueling process continued from there. With new executives in charge, it was a much harder pitch to convince people to get into it. And supposedly, exec story notes would turn more and more erratic as time went on. Starting with something like, stage that scene indoors at an old-time movie theater, to, you know, maybe that scene would play better if it was set outdoors at a drive-in movie. Either way, it had many rewrites. And then it was announced on March 25th, 2002, the Burbank studio of Walt Disney Feature Animation would soon be transformed into an all-digital operation, producing only CG movies, with the last two hand-drawn projects, Brother Bear and the 30% of My Peoples, being completed in Florida. And though David Stainton allowed Barry's film to officially go into production in May of 2003, the project was only up and running for a brief 6 months. Later in November of 2003, David Staten flew to the studio's Florida animation branch where Barry Cook worked and announced that the film would be shut down due to Chicken Little just having more potential. He also announced that the branch would be closing down the following year, decimating everyone's jobs. So in November of 2003, it was cancelled. Why? The guys at the top just weren't getting it. Not to mention, Chicken Little was deemed more favorable. Look how that turned out. Though apparently that too had been warped to hell and back. Another factor came from the fact that executives seriously underestimated the appeal of bluegrass musicians. Though Cook had argued that they just distributed Oh Brother Where Art Thou domestically in 2000 with a load of bluegrass music and went on to win a Grammy as Album of the Year and become one of the best-selling soundtracks of all time. But apparently by 2003 it was forgotten. And soon enough Cook discovered that there just wasn't room for him either at the new version of the company. And after 22 years he moved on, saying, "It's a hard lesson to learn that, while you may be personally loyal to a corporation, it's impossible for a corporation to be loyal back to an individual. Enormous multinational companies just aren't built like that." Yeah. And so Cook went on to tell each voice actor. Charles Durning was especially upset after apparently being incredibly hyped to do voice work for an animated character in a Disney film, and that was the end of My Peoples 18 years ago. So, where are they now? Well, for most of 2009, Cook was over in the UK, where he worked at Aardman Animations. And in 2011, he became co-director of another iconic movie, Arthur Christmas. So I wouldn't say it was a totally bad ending. Looking back on My Peoples, Cook said, "More than any other project, I poured my soul into it. I opened myself up to all the things I love, the culture I grew up in, the music that I still to this day love dearly. It was all part of that. It was very personal to me as a filmmaker, as is a running theme with these cancelled productions. It seems a little ahead of its time with its style and a new corner of representation for a culture less common on the big screen, but it likely won't be coming back. Just a shame that Chicken Little had to be the thing that replaced it."
How'd you get over there?
Over where?
There.
Where?
There. How'd you get over there?
Who are we talking about?
This is Fox's cancelled mouse guard. Thanks to Diego Lacamara and Futaba Forever for the suggestion on our Discord. being a best-selling comic series created by David Peterson. It's a medieval fantasy about a society of mice who are bound to a noble duty of protecting their fellow brethren against hostile species. Mouse Guard takes place in the 1100s and thus has them protect themselves using armor and weapons from medieval times. Publishing for the series began through Boom Studios' Archaea imprint since early 2006, purportedly releasing each issue bi-monthly in collections, as well as amassing a number of spin-offs too over the years. And back in 2008, the first collection won an Eisner for Best Graphic Album Reprint, something Nimona also received 8 years later, as well as for Best Publication for Kids and Best Anthology in 2011. So a pretty decent source material to adapt. Bringing us now round to the movie adaptation. Fox acquired the rights in 2016 and it was conceived as a hybrid piece combining performance capture techniques alongside visual effects courtesy of Weta Digital. Now, Weta Digital are a dominating force in their field. When it comes to their VFX history, they've got it all. The Marvel films, the Batman, Kingsman, Godzilla vs. Kong, Avatar, Planet of the Apes, Lord of the Rings, basically anything astounding was probably them. So slotting them onto this project can only mean some top-shelf production quality. And during these early days, more crew members came to the surface. Matt Reeves, director of Planet of the Apes and later The Batman, was set to produce, alongside Ross Ritchie and Stephen Christie, who come from Boom Studios. Gary Whitta was set to screenwrite the whole thing, whose history work is quite cool, writing Rogue One and Star Wars Rebels, as well as the Walking Dead Telltale game, and as director of the Animal Talking podcast. Nice. And to top it off, David Peterson, of course, was co-producing too. Move forward a year and you then have Joe Hartwick and Wes Bull join the team, a regular duo responsible for the Maze Runner trilogy, as well as graphics for a few documentary shorts, a handful of short films, and an untitled Planet of the Apes project. Still, this was a powerful team as the foundation for this movie. Not to mention, conceptually, it was refreshing to see a company like Fox showing the initiative to adapt non-superhero graphic novels into mainstream films, like the Kingsman series and, of course, Nimona. All to now take us back to an epic fantasy about a world of mice inhabiting a lush forest world. And the budget? $170 million. Cool. Talk about swinging big. And thus, pre-production was well underway. Cast members started being pinpointed, and the three made public are ones I don't even need to introduce. Heard of a couple people called Idris Elba, Andy Serkis, Thomas Brody Sangster? Exactly the people for the job, considering there are Game of Thrones vibes with this setting, as well as the fact that Andy Serkis and Weta Digital had literally worked together to make Gollum a CG reality. From the sounds of things, everything just seemed to fall into place. As when the director recalled events, this was his explanation. Fox production chief Emma Watts had been fantastic through this whole process. We made 3 movies together and she's been a huge champion, and the first time she asked what did I want to do after Maze Runner, I said something small, and she said make it cool and big. Sounds like the opposite of what he asked. Anyway, they'd been talking about this Mouse Guard thing, this Mice with Swords epic. She wanted me to take a look at it and to think of it like Avatar, and what would James Cameron do? Wow, daring to look to Avatar for inspiration considering how little cultural impact that seemed to have on the public, but I can definitely see the logic behind that, to a certain extent. Though maybe with this outlook, I can also start to see its downfall. I took the book home, saw the imagery, and locked onto this. Avatar with medieval mice. That's when it clocked in, when the possibilities presented themselves and the ideas began flooding in. Right. Still, pushing super hard on visual eye candy like Avatar intended still sounds like a magical prompt, especially if the source material can actually bolster up its impact from a story and charm aspect too. We'll roll with it. Continuing on the tale, Wes Bull went on to say, we brought Glenn Derry, who designed Cameron's films, with the goal of making a trailer to show what it looked like for mice to really walk around and to fight. So 12 or 13 weeks later, we made a sizzle reel, a test trailer with really good previs. We got Weta involved, got Dan Lemon who did the visual effects of Caesar for Planet of the Apes. We had the best craftsmen from my point of view, and started down a 1.5-year long road. By the way, check if you're subscribed if you're liking this kind of content. What a build-up of hype this project sounds to be, with all its big names attached and all its moving parts. This unsinkable system is what Wes Bull described as the machine that founded this film and motivated him so much to see it through. Another such crew member was Darek Zabrocki, as a concept artist who would also be a part of the imagery of this film that got out to the public later on. Priorly working on concept art for Maze Runner, Robin Hood, 2 Love, Death and Robots episodes, the lead concept artist for Sonic 2 these days, as well as with a video game history again in Halo Wars 2 and Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Really cool to see. Man, this is why I follow crew members as I discover them. You never know what hidden gems you can find. And during these good times, in June 2018, screenwriter Gary Whitta would also go on to tweet a preview of the first page for eager fans. A poorly aged image with today's knowledge. And as pre-prod came to an end and filming was a mere 2 weeks away, it happened. We kept building out the movie, hiring cast that was about to fly here, and then 2 weeks out, boom, it just happened. It sucks having the rug pulled out from under you. We had assembled some of the best artists I had ever dreamed of working with, and they wanted to be here. Many of them came up to me in the lunchroom to say, this felt so different. It wasn't another superhero movie or a sequel, it was an original, but one that fit the box of those movies. A big mainstream project. The author of these graphic novels created a universe, and it felt like every day we were making Star Wars. That kind of endless potential. I was on the stage prepping with the entire crew, and the stages were being built out, and I get this call, and I try not to tell anyone and have to go back out there and work. Eventually, I had to come clean with everyone. The project had been halted in April of 2019 due to that iconic merger of Disney and Fox. And with many projects going down from this corporate swallowing, Mouse Guard was one of the very earliest casualties, as Blue Sky Studios in its entirety went down 2 years later under new management too. Westball on this commented that he had no ill will towards Disney. They made a decision. We asked, are you sure? And they were. They had their reasons. An unknown IP of a rodent Game of Thrones is just a risk some companies don't want to play with. And a little later down the timeline, Bull would confirm rumors of its cancellation on Twitter, as well as uploading a video tour of the empty studio. It had been in development at Fox for around a year. But that's not the end of the tale. We love a good revenge reveal, as it was at this time that West dropped the ball of 9 minutes of a demo reel for the film, the likes of which you've probably had in the background of this video sporadically. To be clear, this isn't how the movie would have actually looked, as this demo was rendered in Unreal Engine. There's a lot of connections to video games this time around, huh? Using some of the movie's core assets. If you're looking for actual true-to-vision representation, keep a closer eye on the artwork for the production. Speaking of which, it was also now that Darek Zabrocki released this bombardment of artwork mentioned previously too, all to hopefully garner some attention and put in motion attempts of an early res. For me, it was the biggest, most elaborate and in-depth, full of freedom project I ever took part in. Sadly cancelled, but hey, whatever was done was golden, and it's gonna resonate through my works in upcoming weeks, months, or even years. It was at this point Westball started looking away from Disney for this project. Emma was great. She asked Disney to let us shop it around and see if other studios were interested, but it's a big number for studios that have slates set for years in those kind of films. One article reported the possibility of Netflix since they got behind Andy Serkis's Mowgli movie when it was dropped by Warner Bros, and is also relevant now since Nimona got a similar pathing through them too. Though with Mowgli, the film had already been wrapped and was completed, so the contexts are still different enough to not be in Mouse Guard's favor. Another issue with the phase of straw grasping was working around lowering the chunky budget. You have to understand, the machine was built and the Weta pipeline. Everything had been built out for a year. If you try to cut it in half, that machine doesn't work. You could do that with live action, but we were inventing a new technological scope that would have been hard to pull off in a much quicker turnaround than the one we allotted for. The very machine that gave this film such a pedestal was equally part of its downfall. And with his project's obituary, after 2 months of searching, he wrote, "Yes, sadly it's true. Our #MouseGuard movie is dead. Seems it's too big a risk. It's a damn shame, really. We had something special. To my hella talented cast and crew, I'm sorry I couldn't push this one through. The past year with you all has been a blast. May the guard prevail." Westball was then asked to look back on production 10 weeks later, it's also where we got a lot of previous quotes, commenting on any request of major thoughts, to which he said, well, maybe I should have asked permission before I posted that footage. I might be in a bit of trouble. But a lot of artists worked very hard here, and it broke my heart that nobody was going to see their work. I gave up no spoilers, this was a teaser done as a test, and I hoped it might help the movie, but I wish I'd asked. The concept is refreshing but familiar enough, and our approach was to take a very familiar, classic hero journey story with cutting-edge technology. The ambition was the spectacle you felt going to those Planet of the Apes movies, where it was stunning to watch this magic trick unfold in front of your eyes. This story was so charming and inviting, a perfect 4-quadrant movie, and a lot of studios loved it. I was thrilled by what we had done and the machine we had built. I did get comments like, it's an IP that nobody knows, or that people might not relate to mice characters. I got all that. But my argument was that we embraced the blue people in Avatar. Either way, the Mouse Guard never came to fruition. Could it receive the Nimona treatment of a revival too? Maybe. I personally am more for the deeper influence a film of that category can bring, but this sounds pretty intriguing too. It's always fun to root for the little guys. And as Westball put it to rest, even though the machine has been disassembled, the beautiful thing is there is this digital movie all designed and resting inside a video game engine, and it all exists on a hard drive. If we should decide to relaunch, even if we approach it in a different way, all those assets that were built are there and we can dive back in. Someone told me 15 years ago, heat comes and goes, but talent never dies. This film will be relevant in 5 years as it is now. I have faith in that, and maybe the attention will inspire someone to take it on. All I want is to see the audience in theaters react to all the incredible things we dreamed up here. What a powerful statement to end on. Oh, and there's one more thing from Gary Witter, 2.5 years later in March 2022, whereby he said, when I was tweeting recently about abandoned projects, I didn't include this one because it's still too painful. Probably my favorite thing I've ever written, poured my heart and soul into it. Everybody loved it, ripped my guts out when it got, ooh, that's a word I won't say on this video. Not to make any news or anything, but I think this will be my next movie. I kinda went off after this movie, had a vacation, and was sort of dreaming about what could be next, but if all goes according to plan, this might be it. It could be pretty special, actually. We're just in the early stages, of course, but it's gonna be a giant friggin' movie. My next movie is probably gonna cost what my last 3 movies combined cost. It's kinda crazy because it's going to be one giant visual effects movie, essentially. It's a fairly beloved little comic series, such as Maze Runner in a lot of ways. There's a lot of people who love these books. I don't entirely know how to process this one. There is no formal announcement just yet, but I also can't tell if they're talking about our Mouse Guard or just another comic series. Either way, it's always exciting to hear the rumblings of a new bodacious project, and being a unique adaptation is always a plus. But that's all she wrote about this little tale about a little community. On the side, I came to learn about another cancelled project I thought I would share with you, with The Croods. Yes, this movie came out, and of course, you can see it right in front of your eyes, but there is a cancelled underlying film that became the foundation for this movie. As way back in the day, this movie was to be done by Aardman Animations. Yes, The Croods was gonna be stop motion and everything. See, back during the timeline of Around the Croods and a little bit before, there was an iconic partnership between DreamWorks Animation and Aardman. Most notably, they made Flushed Away together, but this was a deal that would eventually fall through, with Croods being one of those projects that got transferred to one studio rather than the both of them. So how did it happen? What came to be? And what was the original idea? Well, with both studios now revisiting their hits of the early 2000s, with both Aardman making Chicken Run Dawn of the Nugget and DreamWorks with Puss in Boots: The Last Wish dipping back into the Shrekiverse of theirs, I thought I'd likewise cast back to that time. Back to when The Croods was called Crude Awakening and was being co-written by a certain former member of Monty Python. God, timelines are weird. And the timeline we ended up on is the one where both studios ended up making their own caveman movies separately. So let's cast back to 1999 when DreamWorks struck $250 million with Aardman. Up to this point, Aardman had grown strength to strength with their short films, with animation mastermind Nick Park bagging them 3 Oscars. I wouldn't exactly say it was their peak, but you know, a very iconic history of theirs. These Oscars came from Creature Comforts in 1989, which is a personal favorite of mine. I mean, look at this. This is wholesome and incredible. Have you seen this? If you don't know this, this is real-life human conversations that were animated onto animals as if it was their lives. Brilliant. You then also got The Wrong Trousers in 1993 and A Close Shave in 1995. Can't go wrong with a little bit of Wallace and Gromit. It was undeniable that Aardman had the quality factor, but not necessarily the resources to make a full feature-length movie. Meanwhile, at the same time as this financial hurdle, Steven Spielberg and Jeffrey Katzenberg were looking to quickly grow DreamWorks into a new major Hollywood studio, to rival Disney most notably, but also Universal, Warner Brothers, and what have you, all the others. Now, they'd already been beaten to the punch for the first CGI movie with Toy Story, and were now looking to invest in a secondary studio with a different flavor to them, much like Disney had found with Pixar. Enter the Plasticine boys, all the way from Bristol of all places. The UK is getting a piece of the penny pie now. So come to the turn of the millennium and that juicy $250 million deal was struck to distribute no fewer than 5 Aardman movies. Now, the first deal hits off with a triumph in 2000 with the one and only Chicken Run, the most profitable stop-motion animation movie of all time. Though the Aardman guys apparently had an interesting working relationship with mogul Katzenberg.
Jeffrey was sort of like Mrs. Tweedy. He would come into the coop and open up one of the roofs and catch us all.
Now, though usually with the cancelled series I go out and find all sorts of articles and concept arts when talking about a cancelled movie, I actually have all sorts of details in this documentary I found on the Aardman YouTube account called A Grand Night In, The Story of Aardman, which is where we'll be getting a lot of our sources. I'll link it in the description if you want to see it for yourself. That was Nick Park talking, for example, in that clip. Still, at the end of Chicken Run, everyone left the project pretty happy. Chicken Run now being credited as the reason why the Best Animated Film category was introduced by the Oscars in the first place. It was probably the only W animation really got in the Oscars, but The movie ended up grossing $227 million. Hence, it's the best of all time. It was also one of DreamWorks' highest earners to date, right up to the release of another movie they'd been working on. Everyone knows that Shrek was a generation-defining smash-mouth smash hit, grossing almost $500 million and completely blowing Chicken Run's box office out of the water. And whilst Chicken Run has that credit of the awards introduction, Shrek was the one that took all the glory, winning the first ever Best Animated Movie Academy Award, beating Monsters, Inc. Also, side note, never forget that Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius was also nominated for that first one, which is one of my favorite things ever. Why was he there? Nonetheless, the deal was still on, and Aardman got to work, simultaneously working on both the first feature-length Wallace and Gromit movie at the enthusiastic request of Katzenberg, as well as their first CGI effort, Flushed Away, as we mentioned earlier. They also had some other projects in development. In comes John Cleese and Kirk D'Amico. Now, if the second name's not familiar to you, well, this year he directed the ill-fated Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken, so it's still relevant in DreamWorks, at least. Now, both of them had an established relationship with DreamWorks. Cleese voicing King Harold in the viciously beloved Shrek 2, it's easily in my top 5 personally, and they'd been working on an animated adaptation of Roald Dahl's The Twits, which never came to fruition, but interestingly enough, it kind of has with Netflix's version releasing next year. Is there a single idea out there that's not going to be put into animation at this point? No. Industry be industrying. Still impressed with the script, DreamWorks invited the two of them to choose from the ideas they had brewing and develop it into a movie. Cleese and D'Amico chose what was, at that time, a buddy story of two cavemen on the run. Yeah, forget the cave people family we eventually got. This was a full-on prehistoric farce. Farce is a very familiar style of comedy for Cleese, having previously explored it with both Fawlty Towers and his 1988 Academy Award-nominated movie, A Fish Called Wanda. Farce is a genre which puts comic characters in highly precarious and improbable situations, making life difficult for the characters involved. One glance at Fawlty Towers and it's that. And on the visuals front for this story that was meant to be some warping of Croods that we know and Twits from Roald Dahl, we only really have one singular concept art of the original character designs of the duo on the run. Here it is. Clearly still having influences for what body types the characters are gonna have in the actual CGI Croods that we know, since they wanted to look a little different. But as for the details on the plot and all the rest of it, it's up to our imagination, really. But there's still plenty of story to tell around the background behind how this movie came to be, and where it developed from here. If you haven't already, come along and subscribe. Titled as Crude Awakening, a much funnier title compared to just The Croods, but you could see how it was translated over, and so the two got to work writing the script. The Aardman DreamWorks movie machine was running smoothly, with Crude Awakening ready for production following the next two releases. Cut to 2005, and initially, Wallace and Gromit: Curse of the Were-Rabbit seemed to be a success, charting at the top of the US box office and grossing $192 million worldwide. They also had a great PlayStation 2 game that I was really obsessed with for a time, at that time. However, when you factor in that DreamWorks made $556 million with Madagascar in the same year, concern begins to grow. And Flushed Away didn't do any better, only grossing $178 million. Now maybe as a kid I would have agreed with that. I, for some reason, really didn't like Flushed Away when I first watched it, but now I love it. It's probably because it's so British. And actually, that was the issue for both studios. There was an uncertainty of cultural difference with the distinctly British Aardman and the more corporate, universal appeal of DreamWorks. They'd actively invested in Aardman for this very reason, but now they were worried that British humor doesn't make money. It's also a stigma that has haunted the stop-motion genre to this day. Case in point, even after Studio Laika coming in and movies like Coraline, Fantastic Mr. Fox, and Isle of Dogs, Chicken Run's still the highest grossing stop-motion movie even before you factor in inflation. That was when, in 2007, after making just 3 of the 5 agreed films, DreamWorks and Aardman announced their divorce. Crude Awakening was cancelled. Well, not quite. DreamWorks, being the financer, kept the kids in the separation, with the project deferring to them. Now, switched to a fully CGI project, Chris Sanders stepped on board after both writing and directing arguably hand-drawn animation's last hurrah, Lilo and Stitch. The guy was a sought-after name at the time and a big coup for the otherwise troubled project. But hang on, didn't Chris Sanders direct How to Train Your Dragon around the same time? He did! In fact, that's the movie that pulled him away from Crude Awakening. Looking back, Sanders said, "The concept was really cute, but the story wouldn't quite lift off the ground. Crude Awakening needed a reinvention, and it got it from..." the original co-writer? Yes, Kirk D'Amico of all people came back into the picture to direct himself. This was the point where 2 characters were swapped out to be a full family, D'Amico wanting to tackle an ensemble comedy instead. Gone was the on-the-run plot in place of a family simply trying to find a new home. And thus, Crude Awakening had now been fully transformed into The Croods. The Croods are on the screen the entire time, D'Amico said, and it's because it's an ensemble comedy. You have to track every single one from scene to scene. You can never take it easy or cut away to the villain. The prehistoric world was rejigged to be more fictional and imaginative, most of the creatures in the movie being complete inventions. Quickly addressing comparisons to the Flintstones, there was a conscious effort to go for a radically different character design. Initially slated for 2012, the project continued to be delayed to March 1st, 2013, before finally settling to March 22nd, 2013. I wonder what those extra few weeks were for. The movie made an impressive $587 million, spawning a sequel that came in, 2020. This franchise just can't get any luck, can it? Still, making $500 million seemed like the correct kind of move, as much as it's unfortunately a lot less British. Cut back to Aardman, and whilst they lost the Crude Awakening rights, that didn't stop them from toying with the caveman concept that they'd already developed for the movie. This would evolve over the next 10 years until we'd eventually get Eddie Redmayne as a caveman in 2018's Early Man. Yeah, I'm not a fan of this one. It's just Space Jam with cavemen and football. That's soccer for you Americans. I'm not kidding. The plots are weirdly similar, and I don't know if you've ever watched a claymation soccer match, but there's absolutely no stakes at all. I'm no sports guy, but at least with an actual game, there's some spontaneity to it. A game that is completely scripted and predestined is just so boring. I'm sorry. Only Michael Jordan can pay it off. Cry me a river, LeBron James. I always wanted to go with the underdog, but I think DreamWorks took it with the Croods on this occasion. They made way more money, they got out of a notably financial difficulty, as much as I'd gladly take $100 million myself, and what Aardman came out with afterwards 10 years later just isn't it. And there you have it. That's how Croods and Early Man came out of one project. What I find fascinating about this whole story is that neither of these eventual movies have much in common with the original story whatsoever. Perhaps just the genre of farce is slowly fading away. And whilst The Croods is decent enough, I would have loved to have seen a stop-motion version of it. It's almost like you could see how much better the project would have been if you put the Croods script and Early Man's art style together. maybe we would have gotten something really special. Or maybe it would have never made any money in the first place. Today we're talking about the cancelled Robodogs. Have you heard about this movie? Are you aware of it beforehand? This is an interesting one that was dug up and recommended to me on our Discord server. So thank you to Nefuako and Astroseed P for suggesting it. That Astroseed name, by the way, is not the last time we'll hear of it. Now, funnily enough, there is actually a 2015 live-action film called Robodogs. This is not that. You may have watched the actual finished Robodogs. This is something different, as this is attached to Marza Animation Planet Inc. back in 2013, trying to announce their very first original feature, Robodog. Not exactly the best look if this is their first attempt, but we'll go with it. Now, Marza Animation Planet Inc. is actually, surprisingly, a studio that holds one of my favorite animations of all time. And I didn't realize that. This is a Japan-based CGI animation studio doing feature films and, wait for it, video game cutscenes. Oh. And when you think of Japan-based CGI animation doing video game cutscenes and being formed by Sega, who do you think of but none other than Sonic the Hedgehog? Yes, these are the guys that make Sonic the Hedgehog cutscenes. Crazy. Specifically, they made cutscenes for the Sonic the Hedgehog game, as in Sonic 06. Wow, the lighting goes mad in that movie. Everything else is awful. My god, unless you're watching the Snapcube version, it is a train wreck in other forms. But that is incredible. One of my favorite short stories of all time is actually the intro to Sonic Unleashed. And again, I'm pretty sure that was covered by Marza Animation Planet Incorporated. Madness. Absolutely flawless in the visual aesthetic, and honestly, the people I would love to do a full-on CGI Sonic movie. How has that not been done? I have no idea. They even make feature films nowadays. I mean, fine, the Ben Schwartz Sonic movies are good enough, but man, I want this. To be fair, they do have a hand in the Sonic live-action movies. They're one of the production companies involved, so I guess they helped build Sonic himself. Also, they made Lupin the First, which I think looks absolutely gorgeous. I, again, need to get around to seeing that movie. Anyway, that's a later thing in 2019. Now, Robodog was a family comedy film. Aren't they all? Makes sense, right? With the voice actually being done by Chris Colfer, and then later replaced by Ron Perlman. Already, production going through a few hurdles if replacements are happening this early on. Anyway, now with the plot line, we have a pretty simple description, being a classic heartwarming adventure story about an unlikely duo who couldn't be more different. KC, Kinetic Canine, is a bright, energetic, but overzealous robotic dog, whilst Marshall is an old, curmudgeonly real dog, set in his ways and has little patience for anything new. This canine odd couple embarks on the adventure of a lifetime, where each will learn the true nature of friendship and not judge a book by its cover. Very, very simple. Essentially, young, new, modern, hip, technologically advanced Robodog, an old dog, new and old. Classic, standard, makes for an easy setup and foundation for what is the main real plotline and themes, right? Now, this movie was originally set for a 2015 release. That's 9 years ago now. But we do actually have promo footage, fully rendered and properly done, as well as a storyboard uploaded to the Marza YouTube channel, and some demo reel stuff. This is just a quick cheeky plug to tell you to subscribe if you're interested in cancelled movies. So production was very much underway and animation had been done. Even, I guess, marketing if you include that promo footage. In fact, actually, while researching for this movie, I came to find that someone has actually compiled absolutely everything together. Astroseed P on sonicstadium.org. Also, I realize in hindsight, the same person that showed up on my Discord server. So if you're watching this Astroseed, thank you very much for your contributions to this. Had I known you'd already made a compilation of all of the footage we would ever need, I might have made this cancelled video a little bit sooner. Nowadays, I'm doing cancelled episodes that have less footage, using the footage from similar productions by the same people. So that's my way of getting through this later stage. But I guess this is more like an early era video. Anyway, that's production stuff on my end. You don't need to hear that. Now, as we usually do for these cancelled episodes, I'll have all sorts of sources linked in the description if you'd like to see this initial Sonic Stadium forum. And if I haven't done, someone please shout at me on my Discord server and I can quickly tweak that. I'm only human, not every video has a sources section. Some other facts we do know about the film is the fact that Marshall, the name for the old dog, wasn't always called Marshall, as during the promo footage, they was actually renamed to Marshall and was originally going to be called Sherman. As we have as well a teaser trailer of this footage, whereby they describe him as Sherman, even being revamped in different ways with the different voice actor and different movements described by somebody else. The teaser trailer as well, we've been shuffling incorporated into the whole thing. You know, it looks quite nice and standard. It's simple, but it's nice. You can see where it's going. It's a very simple two-animal plotline. Maybe the adventure wasn't interesting enough. Maybe it was too cliched with the young and old. I think it sounded like a pretty standard, good way to go about things. but eventually, it just vanished. The actual cancellations for this movie are really unknown. There was never really an official announcement that it had been stopped, other than from a small press release on their old website apparently, and just like that, the film was permanently shelved. Thankfully, despite the fact that this was their first attempt at a movie and then it fell apart, Marza Animation Planet didn't disappear right then. Of course, they've still got Sega in their back pocket to make any Sonic cutscenes whenever they needed to. Although I swear cutscenes for Sonic have been more, in-engine lately, so maybe they've even dropped that recently. Instead, they would go on to make other things, such as Space Pirate Captain Harlock alongside Toei Animation, and then practically one movie a year after that. Kingsglaive, Final Fantasy XV, Resident Evil Vendetta, Lupin the Third, the First as I mentioned, as well as production team on the Sonic live-action movies, and that's really been keeping them up. There's then all sorts of other things along the side. They've done short films, even the likes of Sonic short films on the side, which are fun to see, and an ungodly amount of video game cutscenes, as you can probably imagine. The most recent one apparently being Sonic Frontiers. Okay, what do I know? They are involved in those kind of things still. Oh, and they did the lighting to the remake of Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. Wow. And animations for The Last Guardian. God, this is fascinating to see. The 3D models for artwork illustrations in Splatoon 2. Marza Animation Planet is a real oddball of an animation production company, right? They're very much involved in the gaming sphere, but I think video game cutscenes sometimes look better than movies, and I wish they could have it's probably because they had the full budget to do something in 3 minutes, but I would love to see a proper animation in this movie aesthetic. I guess that just means I gotta get round to watching Lupin the Third the First. Lupin 3 the First? I don't know how you say that. I'll learn it soon. It's an animated movie I haven't watched, and I do want to watch every animated movie one day. In fact, actually, by the time this video comes out, I've very likely already released the Unwatched series. Hey, how did that go? I hope it's been alright. So if you haven't seen that already, come check out my Unwatched episode of Lupin the Third the First, because that's something I was definitely planning to do. Or I've just spoiled it for you, in which case, I'm sorry. Anyway, that is all the story there is for this cancelled little side project by an interesting studio, with very little going on for why it was cancelled or how it really fell apart, but all sort of footage that go on to imagine the days that could have been. And with that, we come to the end of our one-off compilation. It's at this point we have admittedly recategorized our entire cancelled series lineup, and considering there's not really much left to cover other than faint, tiny scraps of projects, or a new one if that's appeared in like the last year or two, chances are we will wrap it all up with a super compilation of every cancelled movie. For fun, why not? And then perhaps we'll be putting a pin on the cancelled series there, or we might rebrand it. I've been thinking of an idea of the deleted series, which is just like the cancelled, but at smaller scale, talking about deleted scenes and versions of stories, even if they're part of an actually finished, produced film. We'll see, I'm still thinking about it. Murmurings at the back of a long video is just how I like to run things, apparently. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed seeing a whole bunch of somewhat lost media, and I'll finally stop rambling to you now. My name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this compilation. Do tell us your thoughts on each of these projects. Which is your favourite? Which had the most chance? What one are you glad to see the end of? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts and more. It's always fun to talk about this stuff. And I shall see you all in a little bit. Cheerio.